Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Write That Disaster Plan. I am Alicia Nottingham, Assistant Library Conservator at the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory, Heritage Library Division, NALIS. We ask that you keep your cameras off and your mics muted. You are invited to type your questions into the chat for the question and answer segment at the end of this webinar. Let me introduce our organization. The National Library and Information System Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, NALIS, is the country's coordinator of all library and information services. Beyond the Heritage Library, there are over 25 public libraries, 3 libraries in correctional institutions, libraries in the secondary and primary schools, and special libraries at several government agencies, all administered by NALIS. Please visit our website, nalis.gov.tt, for more information about our services. We'll post the link in the chat of this webinar. Is to promote and to preserve national heritage information. The Heritage Library Division, located on the second floor of the National Library Building, Port of Spain, Trinidad, helps NALIS fulfill the goal of acquiring, promoting, and preserving national heritage information. Special collections acquired or donated to the Heritage Library Division consist mainly of traditional library items created by or interest to a significant person or organization of Trinidad and Tobago. I invite you to follow the Heritage Library Division on Facebook at NALIS HLDTT. See the link in the chat. The Preservation and Conservation Laboratory is responsible for ensuring the overall longevity of library materials, with attention to the Heritage Library Division and its collections of historical importance. The PAC Laboratory, which was officially commissioned in 2013, helps NALIS fulfill its role as the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. Preservation and Conservation, or IFLA PAC, Regional Center for the English-speaking Caribbean. Just recently, NALIS and IFLA signed the new agreement for a further 3-year term from November 1st, 2021. NALIS is a part of a network of 16 IFLA PAC centers around the globe with the aim of providing knowledge and expert advice on preservation and conservation practices within their region to serve as a IFLA's key area of work on safeguarding and promoting culture and heritage. We've continued our mission of raising awareness of preservation and conservation issues through our preservation and webinars and preservation webinar series. In case you missed any of our previous webinars, the link to the NALIS YouTube playlist is posted in the chat. Let me introduce you to our facilitator, Danielle Fraser. Danielle has been the library conservator and head of the PAC lab since 2009. Danielle holds a Master of Science in Information Studies and a Certificate of Advanced Studies in Conservation of Library and Archival Material from the University of Texas at Austin. She was a 2008 Conservation Fellow of the National Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. She has been a member of the American Institute for Conservation and the Library Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Danielle enjoys presenting papers at the annual meeting of regional associations, so I know she's looking forward to today. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Alicia. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Write That Disaster Plan. Though the heart of this session today really focuses on the disaster plan itself, it's best to get an overview of how the plan fits into overall disaster management. So we'll quickly take a look back at some of our past webinars which were related to this topic. Then we start with understanding what a disaster plan is and its key elements. We will look at examples for library and archival collections, as well as we'll explore some tools for writing that disaster plan. So let's go. Disaster planning is just one phase of disaster management. It starts with assessing risks by determining our institutional collections vulnerabilities. Last year, we explored this particular topic in Reducing the Risk Part 1. The next phase includes taking measures to prevent and protect through risk mitigation steps to minimize damage. This was the focus of Part 2, reducing the risk. And in the third phase of disaster management, we prepare and we plan. And should a disaster happen, we put steps in place in order to respond with actions that are suitable to that disaster and to our institution. And that's what the fourth phase is, response. And this includes stabilizing collections, assessing damage, conducting the initial triage, with respect to stabilization, etc. And then there's the last phase, recovery, as we salvage and rehabilitate the collection materials. Now, in part 1 of Reducing the Risk, we looked at risk assessment. The risks at your institution could be very different to the ones that are occurring in mine, especially given architectural and geographical differences. When assessing risk to our library and archival collections, we should seek to ask these questions. First, we ask what might happen. Which hazard or agent of deterioration has the likelihood of affecting or damaging the collection? Remember, we can use the 10 agents of deterioration as a good starting point for library and archival collections. And again, just as an example, the hazards at my location in the tropics, where perhaps heavy rainfall, flooding could be a prevalent risk. In your location, let's say you're located somewhere in the US or in Europe, your hazard might very well be as it relates to snowfall during the winter, etc. So again, the hazards are going to be different according to where we might be located. Now, the next question we should ask would be, how likely is that? What is the chance or the possibility of that hazard actually occurring, that action, that situation actually taking place? And what would be the frequency of this occurrence? And then we ask, what would be the frequency of, then we ask, what will be the consequences? My apologies. What is the expected impact on the collections? How severe would the harm be? These questions form the framework for most risk assessment tools, which work well for library and archival collections. In part 2 of Reducing the Risk, we looked at risk mitigation. The ICROM Guide to Risk Management of Cultural Heritage suggested this table to help us think about all the possible options in a systematic way. Now, if you use this matrix of stages of control, and stages of control are listed on the left of the table, that would be avoid, block, detect, respond, and recover, against the layers of control, which will be location or region, site, building, room, cabinet or storage, collection item, policy or procedure, you may end up with many different options for mitigating the risk against each agent of deterioration that's acting on your collection or that's likely to act on your collection. So for instance, at our current location, we may not be able to do much about where we're located. Location or region may factor into new builds. So if you have an option of relocating to another site, you may consider some actions there. But at the site, we may be able to put some things in place to block the action of that risk happening as it relates to avoiding the things that we could put to prevent us from even getting acted upon it. We may consider that we could do certain things at the building level, perhaps at the cabinet or storage level where the items are stored, or maybe on the collection items themselves. And then we may consider detect at the room level. And for example, at the room level, we may consider that we can put in some water detectors or maybe some smoke detectors, something that would actually at the room level be able to detect that particular risk when it happens. And most times when we consider respond or recovery, those actions tend to take place at the policy or at the procedure level. What are we putting in place for the actions that would take place? What are the policies that we have in place for our staff as well as our clients to follow? And so we consider that it may not always be possible to fill each spot of this matrix for each of the 10 agents of deterioration, but this matrix works well as a tool in helping us sort of widen the way that we look at risk mitigation. In part 2, we also considered how do we go about prioritizing or deciding on which risk mitigation option to execute, especially since there could be so many options in place. How do you pick and choose which ones to execute? So there's certain considerations that you might consider in thinking about this. How much does it reduce the risk? How effective is it in really putting that risk at a reduced level? What would be the cost? I know budgets and funding is something that's an issue for so many of us. So what would be the cost of putting this measure in place? Does it reduce more than one risk? That's something that would be a great benefit, that if we put one action in place, it actually helps with other things that are at risk. And is it feasible? Is it something that really and truly you as an organization could put in place? Is it sustainable? Is it going to be something that you can repeat over and over, that it could extend over a long period of time without too much of a complicated way of getting it done? And last thing to consider would be, does it create new risk? Does it, by putting that measure in place, that risk mitigation option in place, are you creating for yourself another risk that wasn't there? Those are some of the things that you will want to consider when thinking of how to go about implementing those risk mitigation options. Now, earlier this year, we hosted Claire McGuire as our guest speaker. She is the Policy and Research Officer of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, or IFLA. She primarily focuses on activities related to culture and cultural heritage, and her work includes coordinating IFLA's PAC regional centers and facilitating coordination between IFLA and partner organizations who are working in culture. Now, in this webinar, Claire introduced us to the IFLA Risk Register for Documentary Heritage and the accompanying toolkit that you can actually access and use. The register is confidential and it's open to any memory institution that has one or more heritage collections. So it's not just restricted to libraries just because the word library is in the name of IFLA. It's open to all memory institutions who have one or more heritage collections. And recording your documentary heritage collections in the IFLA Risk Register will help allow for fast and effective information sharing that can assist relevant actors to support assessment and recovery after a disaster. And IFLA also helps connect institutions to resources that can help manage and reduce risk in advance. So this is another way that IFLA hopes to help institutions with their disaster risk reduction and preparedness measures. So I encourage you to view these previous webinars, Reducing the Risk Part 1, 2, and 3, as well as the IFLA Risk Register on our Preservation Webinar Series playlist on the NALIS YouTube channel. Check them out there. But for our purposes, we're really focused on the disaster plan. So remember, this is just one small element of the entire disaster management that you should have in place for your organization. And risk assessment and mitigation can help prevent a disaster or at least reduce the impact should you have one occur. However, it's an effective disaster plan prepared in advance of a disaster, which results in a calm and reasoned approach to the emergency. Now, this can significantly help to minimize the losses that take place. A disaster is sudden, it's calamitous, it makes it impossible for you to operate normally. And the losses from disasters can be fast and catastrophic. But not every emergency becomes a disaster or need to become a disaster. And sometimes the difference is in our preparation. So I really want to emphasize here that do not overlook the value of planning how you would respond to emergencies and disasters. It's really something that's valuable. Now, the main goal of a disaster plan is to provide preparedness information and give instructions on the initial response that should take place, as well as the long-term steps for that recovery effort. Now, there are several resources available to guide in developing and maintaining a disaster plan, and we've included a few in our webinar resources document. The link would have been posted in the chat, and it will also be emailed to all registrants so that you can download it. Now, different libraries and archival institutions around the world, based on if they are sharing geographic locations or similar climates, they may use similar methods for planning for disasters. A disaster plan is designed to ensure that the day-to-day operations of an organization can continue even in the worst circumstances. Now, this plan should provide for both the organization, your staff members, as well as your clients. Now, during an emergency or a disaster, the protection and the safety of human life must be the unquestioned first priority of all persons involved, be it staff or clients. A human life, unlike books, library materials, archival collections, can never be replaced. And so I emphasize safety first. These steps are what should be included in your organization's overall emergency plan. And again, we're focused more on the disaster plan as it relates to collection. So we're not going into covering this aspect of it for the webinar, but just to quickly review a few considerations, I want to ask you a few questions. How do you alert staff and clients or visitors of an emergency at your institution? Do you have an evacuation plan in place? Are the exit routes clearly marked and visible? Are there emergency telephone lists readily available to staff so that they can quickly call for assistance? Do those lists include police, fire, ambulance services? Is there a first aid kit readily available? Do you have personnel who are trained to administer first aid? Because again, it doesn't make sense that you have a kit, but no one who's trained to effectively and safely implement that first aid procedure. So these are just some of the considerations that we'll think about in implementing our emergency plan. But again, our focus is on the disaster plan itself. So here I highlight some of the key elements of a disaster plan for cultural collections. Now, in general, a disaster plan should include the following: information about the disaster team, the detailed actions to be carried out when a disaster occurs. These should be organized either by types of materials or perhaps the type of disasters. There should be a priority list of materials that would need to be salvaged. What should be salvaged first, second, third, etc. What's top priority? That should be included in your disaster plan. Also include a list of emergency tools and supplies along with their location. Where could those things be found? Where are they going to be stored? And your disaster plan should include training plans that you have for staff, staff that will be trained in carrying out the actions of the disaster plan. And we often forget to include our plans for reviewing and revising the disaster plan. As staff members change, as telephone extensions may vary and change, disaster plans should follow suit and also be added to and changed accordingly. Now, just to quickly touch on the roles of the response team. And again, it's essential that you have a good disaster response team, that team that is going to jump into play when a disaster comes. The members would work in advance of a disaster so that the team is going to be ready to just jump right into action. And each team member has a particular role to play. So for instance, the team leader manages any recovery and salvage operation and coordinates recovery activities. And after consulting with the other team members, the team leader determines the level of response based on established priorities and the scope of the disaster. The team leader may also be the one handling the publicity, public relations, speaking with the rest of the management team or the rest of the organization, etc. Now, the recovery specialist stays current on recovery procedures by reading the literature and attending conferences and meetings, etc. With that knowledge gained through those experiences, the recovery specialist is able to tailor recovery procedures for the library or archive that they're a part of. By training staff and volunteers, the recovery specialist ensures that appropriate recovery and salvage procedures are being followed. Now, the crew manager will be the one who assembles and coordinates work crews of staff and volunteers. Now, in addition to this, the crew manager would control the flow of materials that are going in and out of the recovery center. And also because breaks and food and refreshments are necessary to helping improve morale of those who are working, the crew manager is the one who arranges for these amenities. The supplies and transportation manager, working with the recovery specialist, determines the supplies that the institution needs to carry out the response. And these are things that should be on hand in advance. So they would also arrange for any materials that need to be transported off-site, any recovery library materials, recovered library materials, and may need to be transported off-site. And the recorder maintains a list of priorities for recovery. They're also going to ensure that this list is included in the disaster plan. So should there be new collections coming in, collections that are being added, etc., you're ensuring that that is updated in the plan, and it's the responsibility of the recorder here. But as the response happens, it's the recorder who tracks damaged materials that are going to be sent for rehabilitation, and they are sure to update the collections records to show that those materials were removed or they're currently in cold storage or whatever is happening with them, they're updating accordingly. Or perhaps if materials might need to be discarded, perhaps they can not be salvaged. The recorder is the one who's taking note at this material level, this collection material level. And it's good to have a photographer as part of your team because they help to document the disaster and the subsequent recovery efforts by photographing or perhaps even videotaping or video recording the damage that's done to your library or archive. And remember, they're taking note not just of the building, but also of the collections, of furniture, of supplies, materials, everything that would have been affected by the disaster. Now, it's important that the photographer keeps a careful record of the date and the time of the videos or the photographs that are being recorded. And when an area is declared safe to return to or can be accessed again, the photographer should be one of the first persons in, being sure to capture a photograph before the response team gets into place to actually clean up or salvage materials. And of course, when all of the work is done and things are completed, after photograph, a photograph of things after would be important as well. Now, the communications manager is going to be the one who operates the communication center during this disaster. They are handling the incoming and outgoing calls and messages, the media notices, the public notifications, etc. And the keeper of the plan, the keeper of the disaster response plan, working in coordination with the other members, coordinates all of the activities as it relates to the plan itself. So they're the one who would be the principal writer of the plan. They ensure that the plan is updated, they revise pages and sections accordingly. And if you need to find a master copy of the plan, it will be kept with the keeper of the plan. Now, in the course of writing a disaster plan, we may decide that we want other team members, or perhaps we may join certain roles together based on the number of staff that we have available. But in any case, it's recommended that whoever's on your response team, that they are involved in that planning action because they will be keenly aware by being involved in the planning and doing that risk assessment, the risk mitigation, etc. They're going to be keenly aware of certain things at that risk stage. And your plan should really clearly list out the positions and the duties of any of the members of your response team. Now, the emergency contact information included in your disaster plan should not only list the disaster team. It should also include some of the following. You want to have emergency first responders, such as police, fire, and ambulance services, numbers for or contact information for local representatives of disaster management agencies. For example, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, or ODPM, if you're in Trinidad, or the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, or TEMA, if you're in Tobago, or the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or CDEMA for the rest and the wider Caribbean, based on the level of disaster. And of course, for those in the US, you'll probably need to have contact information for Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. We often hear about that agency. So just to list some examples, each region, each country, each locale will have its own disaster management agency, and it's important that you include contact information for the local representatives. You want to have contact information as well for staff and volunteers, the vendors who are supplying you with materials, equipment, and other services as well. You ought to include the information for the funders, the persons who will be responsible for releasing funds or accessing accounts or accessing monies in order for you to carry out this disaster recovery. And also, it may be important for you to have contact information of the insurance company. A lot of times the insurance companies may insist, based on what their policies might be, insist on being contacted as soon as that disaster takes place. They may send out someone to do a site visit according to the level of the disaster, or they may require certain things coming to them as you're doing the disaster recovery. So it's important to have that contact information available. To respond effectively to a disaster, your library or your archive should have on hand some essential supplies. Now, these can mean the difference between a minor emergency versus extensive damage. And these should be secured to avoid them getting used up in everyday operations. So for instance, the mop, the sponges, you don't want those things getting involved in your regular cleaning or janitorial activities. However, the keys for this kit should be easily accessible at all times, even outside of working hours. You want that should a disaster come, should a disaster be discovered by someone who is working during off-duty times, that they can access and quickly deal with that disaster and access your kit. So the location of the stored disaster recovery supplies should be noted in your disaster plan. Not just listing what they are, but also where are these kits available? Where can someone go to actually get them and access them? And remember, it's the supplies and transportation manager who will be the person in charge of the disaster response supply kit. They're the ones responsible for ensuring that they're fully stocked and responsible for issuing them to work crews or anyone who's getting into the action of the recovery response. Now, we may encounter water-related incidents more frequently, such as a leak, perhaps through damage in the roof, or perhaps a faulty air conditioning unit, broken pipeline. We may encounter floods, hurricanes, for instance. So here are some supplies we should consider keeping on hand for responding more to water-related incidents. So here you see some odd things, your regular things, yes, mop, bucket, sponges, but we also have here listed plastic sheeting, and that's important to have available for throwing over items. It may not be possible for you to move everything out, but being able to just sheet an item with some plastic allows for that water to not do that immediate and continued damage. Having duct tape is important, perhaps for anchoring or sticking or placing this plastic sheeting, but I want to also mention that it's important to have scissors. A lot of times duct tape cannot be easily teared, so having some scissors to go along with it is going to be an important one. And sometimes, because we're operating in a space where the lights are continually going, when there's a power outage, so infrequently, we may not realize just how dark an area could become. So including some flashlights in your disaster kit would probably be handy, because just should there be a power outage along with whatever else is going on, you want your crew to be able to light the way clearly and safely get around the space. Now, big ticket items like the electric fans, the dehumidifiers, the wet, dry vacuums may have to be borrowed or perhaps rented, because you may just not be able to afford to keep those things on hand or have the heavy duty versions of them to help in the case of a major water disaster. So those may have to be sourced externally when a disaster occurs. Now, your disaster plan should also include response instructions. You want these to be clear steps for the persons who discover the situation and what are going to be the subsequent assessment that would need to be included. They may need to quickly assess the space, the location. They may have to, take cue of certain things that have gone on with the disaster, as well as you want to include in this plan subsequent actions that they may need to take place of that initial response. Using a floor plan of your institution, you can help to identify parts of your collection based on their collection priorities, the financial values, perhaps even the vulnerabilities. So perhaps you have items that are highly vulnerable to moisture, water. And so you can identify in a floor plan that these are the collection items that cannot exist with water. And so you would want them moved out of a space should they be affected by such. Now, this is where I'm going to open up a little bit and allow us to get involved in a scenario. So we're building out an emergency instruction sheet, right? So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, and of course you could respond in the chat accordingly. So this one-page emergency instruction sheet should include very simple instructions should a relatively minor emergency take place. So we're looking at just a couple of agents of deterioration, fire and water in particular. So I just want you to think about it. What would I include in that emergency instruction sheet? So what are the first steps when there is a fire? So think about it. Put yourself in that scenario. What would be the first steps should there be a fire? Just getting that chat box in place. So think about it. You would want to activate the fire alarm, right? You'd want to call fire services, right? If the fire alert people, right? I see that response definitely. And by alerting a wide number of people, activating the fire alarm is what is going to do that. It's going to bring to attention that, hey, we have emergency taking place here. Everyone should be activated in order to move or respond. And if that fire cannot be extinguished by staff using a fire extinguisher, that's not the point of you turning around and going back for something, or let's save that particular item. You need to evacuate the building, right? So let's think about a water emergency. It's going to be different. What would be the first steps when there is a water emergency? Let's say, for instance, there's a leak, a burst pipe, water is running everywhere. What should be the first steps? What do you think would be some of the first steps there? No wrong answers. And again, you can put them into the chat. Now, one thing you might consider would be to notify building facilities, right? Or the facilities manager of your building. They would be the team that would be responsible for perhaps accessing the utilities, maybe accessing those pipes, etc., that is leaking. If you have clients or staff members that are near to the affected area or within the affected area, you'd want to relocate them. And then, of course, putting up some caution signs immediately, just something to prevent anyone from moving into the space and potentially slipping or falling, etc., would be some really good first steps. So what should be done at the collection area if the water is coming from above? So you have a leak that has occurred in the roof. Perhaps it's your fire extinguishing pipes that have been installed. Maybe one of them is leaking onto collection area. What should be that set of first steps that you do? Anyone with any ideas? You would want to cover the area with plastic sheeting. And perhaps you may be able to place buckets in order to collect that leak, those drips from above. But it's going to be important that in this emergency instruction sheet, that you include the location of where they can find these items, right? And yes, I agree. If you have no plastic, it would be important to move or relocate those things. Where are the trolleys? Where's a good alternative space that we could quickly move items into? Is there a meeting room? Is there a general space that is open and available? Now, what if the water is coming from below? What should be done? What would be the first actions, the first steps? So you wouldn't necessarily be using the plastic sheeting, right? So I'm just showing you here just a couple of questions that these first steps, those actions that are taking place are going to be different according to the type of emergency that we're going to face. So yes, I see someone putting here that you would move the items to higher ground. So be relocating them to maybe a floor above, or if not, that the whole building is perhaps on the same floor, moving things up, shelves, etc. You want to elevate items. You'd want to check the electricals. Yes, I see that someone has that answer there. And putting in caution signs. You would not want anyone moving into the space or accessing the space where that water is coming up from below. So if not caution signs, you may have to post a staff member to keep unauthorized persons out, perhaps some absorbent pads or things that could be put down to quickly help absorb the water or keep the water isolated in its place. So great. Thank you for your responses and just thinking of it. I mean, just sort of working out the scenario, and that's just us looking at a couple of emergency scenarios. Now, what do we do to bring that situation under control? And these are some suggestions from the Field Guide to Emergency Response from the Foundation of American Institute for Conservation, or FAIC. So if it's a moderate emergency, a moderate disaster, they indicate that you should alert the managers, secure the area. And we sort of discussed some of these things just now for the scenarios we were working out, you know, getting staff and clients out of the space, visitors out of the space, securing the area. You want to find and eliminate the cause or the hazard and notify the insurance. But if it's something more major, you would have to sound the alarm, alert authorities, evacuate the space, notify insurance, turn off the utilities. And a lot of times that's one thing that may cause a problem to go on for longer than necessary, that we don't know where our utility accesses are. Do you know how to turn off the power if necessary? Do you know how to turn off the water supply? Do you know how to, you know, deal with gas if you have gas running through the building? How do you go about turning off those utilities? And sometimes maybe your facility persons might not be at their locations, or they may be at other locations, etc. Those things should be included or noted in your disaster plan, how to turn off. But then if it's catastrophic, you may have to evacuate and go about even moving or protecting the collections in place. And then, of course, notifying, alerting authorities, notifying insurance, etc. Now, here's another sort of way of how you may have to bring a situation under control. So let's say you go on then to assemble the response team if it's something moderate, inspect the damage that has occurred, you want to document, protect what you can protect, stabilize the things that you can with respect to temperature and RH. You may have to locate where we can work at doing this stabilization, and then collect supplies and secure funds, etc. And if it's something major, we'll have to do all of those things, but we may also have to consider securing the buildings and getting clearance to re-enter a space. And if it's something catastrophic, yes, the team will be pulled together, but while you're waiting to enter the building, so this may have been something major happening where the building can't be accessed until emergency teams have declared it safe to do so. While you're waiting, consider purchasing supplies, contact vendors, put them on alert, you know, that these are the things that are going on with us, and then go about doing the other activities of securing the building, the grounds, getting that clearance to re-enter, and then moving into action. Now, one of the key elements as it relates to a disaster plan should include how your team communicates among your staff, as well as with members of the press and your public. And you should have a checklist as to how do you go about having this crisis communication. And a lot of times you would find that if you don't have a public relations or communications department, that you may not consider what do we do in the case of a crisis when we do have to inform and we do have to let the word out as to what's going on. So this is something that needs to be included in your plan. Who is the person involved with saying this? Perhaps have some scripted things ready in your plan so that you can actually just put in maybe the dates, maybe details of the incident, but you more or less have something that's scripted and has been reviewed by a communication specialist for putting forward to the public. And in updating and distributing and practicing your plan, you should decide on what is the policy as it relates to all of that, as well as how do we go about updating? Who receives a copy of the plan? Ideally, printed copies should be available in more widespread locations in case your site is not accessible. So let's say it happens overnight, you can't get access to the building. What would happen if your disaster plan is in the building? So you want to be sure that you have copies that are available off-site in the event that you can't access the building. Now, I want to take a quick look at some really well-done examples of disaster plans. And first up, we're looking at the South Central Regional Library Council. All of these disaster plans we're going to take a look at have been included in the webinar resources. So have no fear, you can actually take a further look yourself. But permit me to just switch across to the document because there's just a couple of things I want to highlight. You should be seeing here the document from the South Central Regional Library Council, and here is their disaster plan. They actually have when the plan was done and when it was updated, right? And a table of contents. I like that they first have a bit on disaster prevention, then the plan, considerations for safety. In their administrative considerations, they're looking at financial, who's going to be the one managing, accessing funds, etc. They list what should be the salvage priorities. And then there's even a bit that includes pandemic, which of course might be a bit new for a lot of organizations now, especially as we've dealt with our recent pandemic. I want to take a quick look at page 6. And here they have emergency numbers. So of course, they've included 911 for the US emergency numbers, and then individuals that you might look to contact: the landlord, the building supervisor, the directors, home and cell phone, a manager, those who are managing finances, etc. And who do you call, who do you contact in case a disaster happens? Now there's another plan that I like to highlight, and it is from the Preston Library at the Virginia Military Institute Archives. And I like the amount of detail that is done and provided in this plan. So again, it has when it was updated and who updated it nicely at the top. But then you see here, it has how do you go about responding to emergencies? And I like that they've now actually highlighted different types of emergencies that are relevant to their location. Previously, we would not have seen hurricanes as listed in that previous plan, but in this one, because they are located along the eastern coast of the US, there have been hurricanes that have been reaching as high as New York. So yes, they've actually included a bit on hurricanes. Tornadoes, we may not necessarily have them in the Caribbean, but of course they have them at their location. And so they would have prioritized and considered which risk in doing that risk assessment part of the disaster management and considering which are the things that are more likely to happen at our location, and then coming up with the response to those particular things. Right, so here is that response generally to the emergency. And I like that they indicate here, most importantly, safeguard human life. You know, that is a top priority. They've included the emergency numbers that you would have for wider emergency, as well as what's contained on your compound, the location itself, and then numbers and emergency contacts for staff members who are going to be involved with respect to the disaster response. Now, I was very much impressed with the plan from the University of California at Davis, home of the Aggies. That general library disaster plan is one that was pretty impressive. So let me have you take a quick look at that. Right, so University of California at Davis, the disaster prevention, preparedness, and recovery plan. Again, when it was revised, it's located right on the front page. I like that. And it includes the initial procedures, what the disaster team would do. They have the duties as well as the list of members, all detailed there. But one of the things I liked was that they had some quick reference things included in this document. So the quick reference of emergency numbers. Quickly, how do you get onto disaster team? And then of course, the initial steps in collection salvage. So let's take a look at that page 26. So the initial steps detailing what do we go about doing? Who is involved? Who of the team gets involved? Do you inform which director, the deputy university librarian? You know, how are we going about making arrangements for securing items, etc. And then stabilization. What are the steps you should take in order to stabilize the environment? And sort of a checklist, one after the other, of what you should do in order to ensure that you stabilize an environment. I like, though, that they included night and weekend desk assistant manuals. So these were some really simple documents detailing those persons who may be on duty overnight or during the weekend, those times when maybe the rest of the staff members, most of the staff members are not located on site. I know sometimes that may be the case, not necessarily for our public libraries, but for instance, for our academic libraries. And that's what this is, a university library, where you would have the library being accessible to staff, to students and faculty, especially over an exam period. You know, libraries tend to run 24-hour periods just to allow their clients to access them. So these manuals include that initial procedures. Someone who's working at the desk overnight or during the weekend can quickly go to this page of information and consult, what do I do? If it's in the case of this, call this person, do this, step 1, step 2, all the way to step 4. If it's flooding, what you should do, who do you notify? And when you do notify them, what information you should give them. You should tell them your name, department, the nature of the problem, the location, so that they can be informed. And contacting persons, who do you call, etc. And then if it's a leak, some of the actions that should be involved. So yes, they give a call, they alert and they notify, but then there's information here as to using book trucks, what you want to do in order to relocate the items, putting buckets or waste baskets in place so that they can catch the drip, etc. Checking for additional leaks. So there's a whole bunch of information here as it relates to that person working at the site overnight or over the weekend. But I also like that this plan included known water trouble spots. We know that all of our facilities are not perfect. There's always that 1 or 2 area, or maybe 4 or 5 areas that do have some troublesome issues with them, that they may have been repaired so long ago that the leaks have come up again, they sprung up in different areas, or there's always an ongoing issue. And so they have a list of known water trouble spots. So where on the first floor do we have issues that we know that we have a leak? We know we have something going on in the wall. We know we have pipes that tend to burst in this area regularly. You can actually document them as part of your disaster response. And then potential trouble spots. You don't have anything actively going on there right now, but there's a potential that should there be something, these are maybe some areas that are important to look to. And so they've listed the restrooms, for instance, the elevator shafts, the janitorial closets. That's the areas where the janitors may store their items. They may have sinks that are there. And sometimes if a leak is left and the sink clogs, it's very easy for that to overflow and affect some other areas. So there's some potential trouble spots that are also listed. And I love that this plan from the University of California, Davis does include some of that information. And the last plan that I want to take a look at is from Indiana State Library, their Collections Disaster and Recovery Plan. Again, when it was created, it would be good for it to have the updated part, but that's fine. And this is one very extensive plan with, of course, some of the information that we're becoming now a little more familiar with, looking at the disaster recovery team. They have a phone tree, the evacuation plan, general procedures, etc. But one thing I really liked seeing in this plan were the recovery cards, collection recovery cards. So let's go to the first one. So they have, according to emergency, they have the, right, according to emergency, they have collection recovery cards. So it's a one-pager as it relates to what do you do. So identifying the collection, what are the things that you would take note of? Removal of wet collections from an affected area. First step to evaluate, then you remove things that are important for you to not do. Don't reuse wet boxes. Don't stack materials on the floor while you're waiting them. Steps in order as to what's going to be carried out. As it relates to books, so particular types of material, what are the things that you're going to put in place on just a one-pager as to this is a card that we are looking at quickly identifying the steps as to what do we do. If we are looking at our manuscript and archival collections, what's the first step? Second, third, all the way down to what should we do with respect to recovering those items. And they have them listed for different types of materials. So there's also oversized collections like maps, newspapers, broadsides, drawings, blueprints, etc. Photographs especially identified here. And so I like that the disaster plan of Indiana State Library has these collection recovery cards that are able to be pulled out for that particular type of material or that particular disaster that's being responded to. Now, there's one tool for writing that plan that I think everyone should get on board with, and that's www.dplanned.org. It's an online disaster planning tool that's available for free to non-profit organizations. And it's one that's over the years been done and developed by NEDCC and other different partners, etc. And I like that for the plan, you can actually customize it to your particular institution. So you may think, wow, starting with a blank page could be tough, but this gives you a template that allows you to just simply type in the information that you need to. So once again, I'm just going to show you the plan. So I have logged in with the demo account. This is at dplan2020.org because this is their old website. I'm going to show you a quick view of what their new layout looks like. Just very quickly, it has a demonstration account here that allows you to just sort of see it already filled out and see certain bits of information in it. So for instance, it has here, you know, dplan demonstration account is the name of the institution, given a fake location, etc., name, etc. So you would actually enter your institutional name. The key personnel, the ones who are going to be the key contacts for this. All the way to their addresses, email addresses could be included. And then of course the disaster team and the persons who would have the responsibilities as it relates to the plan. So all the way from gathering the information about the collections, assessing the risk, determining the salvage priorities, you're going to list who's going to be involved here as it relates to that. You can also personalize exactly what type of materials you have. Do you have archival materials? Do you have any art? What about DVDs and CDs? Do you have manuscripts, maps, and documents? So you can actually check all of the material that you would like to include, and there's a whole range. Do you have parchment, photographic materials, scrapbooks, textiles even? All those things can be included. And then in prevention, they walk you through that aspect of assessing the risk. So you're looking at what particular hazard, what particular risk has what level as it relates to your institution. So for instance, for hurricanes, they've put it here as number 1. Given a little quick note as it relates to hurricanes, maybe the number of times that we've been affected by hurricanes, could it be included here? It's a serious risk. And then perhaps tornadoes may not be as much of a risk. So listed as 3. You know that yes, possible to have tornadoes, but we don't often have them. They've put severe winter storm as 1, but for us here, it's something that we would put down to add to being not a risk, because chances of us getting any winter storms would be very unlikely. So you see here that you're able to go through all the different type of risks and give them a rating as to how much of an effect they can have on your institution. I also like that even in the aspect of preventative maintenance, they have listed some things that you should be doing on a regular basis to ensure that you reduce those risks taking place. And I'm just going to jump to the disaster response and recovery part. So they've included the disaster team. All of those positions that we spoke about are included here. Who's going to be the person who's the primary one for it? Do you have a backup person? Should that person be on vacation or unavailable? What are the salvage priorities? You know, what are the areas that we're going to consider as being top priorities? So they have listed here the records, the ranking that you'll put them in priority, the location even. There's an option to include maps and to color code the maps according to the priority. So perhaps putting red as priority number 1, yellow as priority 2, blue as priority 3, and then brown for items that are non-priority. And so very quickly, somebody can look at a map and know that, if we have this water taking place in priority area 1 and it's red, these are the things that we're looking at taking care of first before we move on to the other items. So putting that in a map form can ensure that those who are responding to the plan can do so very effectively. Now I want to just take a quick look just to show you that D-Plan has been updated. I did not complete getting around to creating an account, but it's possible for you to log in, create an account, and they've now sort of joined up with another agency in order to help organizations respond to these emergencies. So it's been upgraded, and it's exciting that they've put certain other measures in place. I know one of the things the organizers of D-Plan was discussing was possibly putting in some more usability aspects to the plan, perhaps allowing for you to access the plan, not just on a computer, but also on your mobile devices. So it'll be interesting to see where they take this tool and that it continues to remain as freely accessible. Now, there's also one that's maybe more of a hands-on option, one that you could quickly distribute to staff and everyone can have in their hand. And this is a pocket response plan, or PREP. The template is, again, freely available and it's able to be customized. It is actually a legal size sheet of paper that is designed to carry key information, and you would fold it down to be about the size of an ID card. So staff members can actually slip it into perhaps their ID card that they may be wearing with them, or into a pocket, into a wallet, etc. And it allows you to take it around with you very easily. And I'm going to just quickly show you that plan. Right. So initially you would have side A that includes information on staff, disaster teams, the first responders, emergency suppliers. So you can edit this Word document, going in, typing in the information as relevant as to who is at the head, who's the deputy, who's the senior person to contact about this. At the fire department, what's a number to get to the closest fire station, the closest police station. If you have an issue with your electricity or water, or perhaps the internet, telephone lines, all of these things can be included in this document on side A. And then side B, you can use side B to provide a checklist of a sort, one that would be quick listing of collections, recovery, and response. So it's the activities that can actually take place. So how do you coordinate the response? What do you do? What's the first step? What's the second step? So some of those things that we saw in those one pages can be condensed and customized here as it relates to those initial steps that you take for responding to the plan. And so we are at the end, and I know we're a little bit over the time that we would typically do, but before we take any questions that you may have, I want to issue you a special invitation. July brings the finale of season 2 of the Preservation webinar series, and we are so happy that on July 20th at 11 a.m., and I want you to note the time because of the time zone differences, we look forward to hearing from Liz Rose, Textile Conservator of the British Library in the UK, as she shares tips and techniques for caring for textiles. You'll be surprised how many textile elements we actually have in our library and archival collections, not just the book cloth. We may have seals, we may have ribbons, we may have clothing, we may have costumes. There are a whole bunch of textile elements that are in our collection, and the careful attention that we give to handling those items, how we go about displaying them, how we go about storing them, all of those things are going to be key for their long-term preservation. So I want you to be sure to register using the links provided in the chat. And I hope you would join us next month for that webinar. So we can now take any questions that are available. Right. I don't see any questions, so thank you so very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.